So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Claire and I'm the business librarian at Glenview Public Library. Tonight's program is The Future of Work is Here and it is remote. And that's going to be presented by Eilis Wasserman from the Shafer Leadership Academy. So this program is presented in partnership by Glenview Indian Trails, Northbrook, Skokie, and Vernon area public libraries as a part of the Lake Cook Career Collaborative. You can learn more about the collaborative by going to the website, which is careercollab.org, and I will put that in the chat for you as well. So this program is being recorded. The recording should be available in about a week. We also will follow up with the PowerPoint slides with everyone. So please welcome Eilis.
All right. Thank you so much, Claire, for your introduction. And if any point you cannot hear me or can't see the slides, of course, just let me know. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. There will be a copy, a PDF of the slides being sent out. There'll be some, if there's some notes that you want to take during the session, you can definitely do that, or you can just pay attention to the PowerPoint and not worry about having to write things down. Again, my name is Eilis, a little bit of a different type of name to pronounce, but I did put the phonetical pronunciation there in my, under my picture where you can see my name. So let's get started. All right, so you should be able to see my screen. Again, at any point, if you can't, just let me know. So I want to first start out also by kind of setting some expectations that at Shafer Leadership and also my personal facilitation style, it's interactive, it's engaging, and I want to hear from you. I want to know why you are here for this session, and I want us to learn in community together. If you have something to contribute to our discussion, please let me know. Please unmute yourself. Obviously, if you can keep yourself muted during the session to eliminate background noise, that's great. But if you have something to say or you have a question, please go ahead and interrupt me. Let's pause, let's talk through it. I will take a few questions, of course, at the end, but this is again, a discussion-oriented session. I will be providing, of course, a lot of information as well. But I want to hear from you. I also encourage you, if you want to turn on your camera, I would love to see you as well. Of course, that's fine if you want to keep it off, but that's always fun to have that face-to-face interaction. And if you have any questions, of course, again, put those in the chat box, in that dialog box. Okay, so this is the title of our workshop. And here we go. What we're really focusing on today, of course, is remote career readiness. And here we find ourselves coming out of this pandemic, or some of us think we're still in the pandemic, we're moving towards post-pandemic, wherever you think we are certainly the world of remote work has certainly exploded. And so here we are today, and we are going to be talking about this topic from multiple vantage points. So before we get started, I just want to share a little bit about my remote background and where I come from. I am, as you saw on the previous slide, my background is in career development. So I am a career coach. Right now, I'm specifically actually focusing one area of career coaching on coaching introverts in the workplace. So if you are an introvert, feel free, a proud introvert, feel free to share that in the chat box, because I am, and I think that we should honor and celebrate that identity. So right now I work, as Claire said, with the Shafer Leadership Academy. We are a nonprofit, a small community nonprofit located in central Indiana, so in Muncie, Indiana. We provide inclusive leadership development programming. And so there I work as a virtual program manager. And I also coordinate programs like these and do some career coaching related work as well. All of my other background you can see is focused in being a career coach. I've worked at multiple universities like the University of Michigan. I'm also a career coach on the Muse. The Muse is a great career website. And really my first experience working remotely was working on the board of a professional association. So I worked with the Midwest ACE Association of Colleges and Employers. And that is actually really in the past centralized in the Chicago area. So, I like having all those Midwest connections. A fun fact about me is that I have lived in almost all of the Great Lakes states. The only state that I technically haven't lived in, had a permanent address in, is the state of Illinois, but my family lives actually in the Chicago area. And right now I actually live in Michigan, and I'm also transitioning to Wisconsin. So that might sound confusing, but that's a fun fact about me. And I took interest in the world of remote work back in about 2018. And I actually went remote on my own accord about a year before the pandemic started. And I connected to a wonderful organization called Workplaceless. I'm probably going to bring up their name again, but I really encourage you to check out their wonderful resources. This is where I received a remote work certification called Train Placeless, which is for remote facilitators and trainers. So that is my remote backgrounds. And one thing that I do want to share before we get started and move into the content and the material is that a realization for myself is one of the benefits for me personally in working remotely has been actually the relationship building, the connecting and networking aspect of my life. Even as an introvert, I've always been a strong connector. I love having one-on-one connections. And since I went remotely back in around that 2019 timeframe, I have never made more connection in my life. Connections all over the country, connections all over the world. And I attribute that to a lot of being just connected in this remote landscape that we're in. And so I truly believe when you think about your career journey and where you're going, that the ability to have those connections that expand outside of your community can really be beneficial if you know how to leverage them. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay, so I want to first start and actually get a little bit of audience feedback and participation. And as you can see on your screen, I just want to see where everyone is right now. So on the right-hand side, there's 3 numbers. Number 1, I'm looking for a remote job. Number 2, I'm currently working remotely, but interested in learning more. Number 3, I'm an employer, family member of a remote worker, and any other reason. So if you would go ahead and put in the chat box, why are you here? What reason are you here? If you want to type in something, you can, but is it 1, 2, or 3? Right. Fantastic. And again, if there's any other reason you want to share, feel free to do that. Fantastic. So we get quite a variety. We definitely have some 1s, some 2s, a few 3s, so quite the variety. So I hope to be able to address some of the reasons that you might be coming, and I want to learn a little bit more of that in just a second. this is really what we're going to be covering today. If we look at the 5,000-foot view, we are going to talk about the remote landscape and the mindset of being remote. Because if you are thinking about your career journey or you're searching for a job, you have to really get in that mindset of what it's like to be in the remote landscape or understand how to move forward, because chances are that a lot of us have already worked remotely, had experience with remote work, or are currently doing it right now. And then we'll talk, of course, about evaluating remote company culture, looking for a remote first culture. So we're going to talk about that term, the importance behind that, because you want to be a self-advocate for yourself and find a company that does value remote work. And lastly, of course, we'll talk about remote job search best practices. I have a lot of resources on the last three slides that you can take back with you to do your own research as well. And I see, of course, somebody just said, Roman said, working both remote and in office, right? And so that's where we find ourselves. A lot of individuals may be doing what we call a hybrid environment. And we'll talk about that as well, because hybrid is the most desired way to work remotely, really post-pandemic, but it's also actually the most challenging way for companies to work remotely. So if you're in a hybrid environment, your organization really needs to think about that remote first culture. Okay. So again, as we think about where we're headed today, I want to focus on these two mindsets, these two aspects of where we find ourselves in this virtual world. First, we're going to be talking about assessing your remote readiness, whether you are looking for a remote job or currently working remotely, and then also assessing employer remote readiness, right? Because it's a two-way street. Not all employers have responded well to upskilling remotely. Some have, some haven't. How do you assess that? Okay. All right. And so this is kind of a blank screen for the reason that I just want to get your feedback. You can see the question on the bottom. What do you hope to take away or learn from today's workshop? Okay. So if there's a specific question that you have based on what you think we might talk about since we introduced the topic, please put that in the chat box now. Is there anything that you would hope to learn or take away? Any specific questions? Of course, you're welcome to ask questions as we go along. And again, feel free to interrupt me. Oh, I'm loving these questions. Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. And I will say that I am going to be sharing my email address and my LinkedIn URL. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, fantastic. If you have a specific follow-up question, just please let me know. And so a lot of these questions are focused around remote work. So I want to get through these questions as we kind of, move along. We will get to all these questions of where to find remote jobs. Are there part-time remote jobs? And to answer that very briefly, yes, there are definitely part-time flexible jobs out there. Yes. If anyone has a part-time remote job, feel free to put that in the chat box for Gina to see. I've done a lot of career coaching part-time. So that'd be an example of a part-time remote job. Is there a certain industry that favors full-time remote workers? Larry, that's a really good question. And I think that all industries in one way or another can favor remote workers. I'm going to address that a little bit later. However, I will say my initial response is that the tech industry, right? We think about tech, is probably top of mind when it comes to answering that question. And in the tech industry, remember, just because you're in the tech industry, you don't have to have specific technical skills necessarily. Working in any industry requires multiple different types of jobs and skill sets. And of course, we'll talk a little bit about that remote interviewing. We'll talk more if you'd like to, but ultimately getting ready for remote work, part of that is just doing things like this, being on Zoom, communicating through remote channels and platforms, and becoming comfortable with that technology and understanding that mindset in the landscape that we're going to be talking about. Okay. Daily schedule, job boards. Yes. Okay, awesome. So we'll continue to answer some of these questions. I really appreciate them. This is very helpful. So we will keep moving forward. Let's see if my cursor goes here. Okay. So we find ourselves in the world of remote work here because the future of work, the future is flexible working, and remote work is often associated or focused around flexible working options. If you were to ask any individual who has transitioned to remote work, or ask individuals the main benefit of remote work, it all comes down to flexible working arrangements, right? So here's a few statistics just to kind of get us started thinking about this landscape of remote work. That, while 83% of CEOs want employees to return in person, only 10% of employees want to come back full time. Again, this is a survey that was done by the Best Practices Institute in 2021. So it's not the whole nation, but there is definitely a disconnect often between employers and employees coming back. And we see that in the news all the time. And so it's trying to figure out a compromise. One thing I will address later as well is if you are currently looking to work remotely in your current role and trying to approach your employer about that, how might you go about that? So more than half of workers, 55%, say they want to be remote at least 3 days a week. This is a survey done by PwC. And this is very true. That connects to that hybrid landscape. That hybrid landscape, again, is where most remote workers, I would say most, probably at least 50% of them find themselves. And companies are trying to find that sweet spot. Is it 2 or 3 days a week? A lot of companies are kind of going between those two options, 2 or 3 days a week. And really, again, allowing the flexibility needed to manage specifically family matters is rated the highest need when it comes to, thinking about this post-pandemic, this remote work world. That's really what makes a huge difference. Now, there hasn't been a ton of research done on this, but one thing that I actually see right now as well is we think about inflation, we think about transportation and gas prices. We've all seen those gas prices go up. I think that's going to be another contributing factor that we'll see more recent research on. So ultimately, 80% of companies plan to keep some degree of remote work post-pandemic. So that is huge. If you're looking for remote work, it is out there. In fact, in some ways it's swaying towards there could be in some sectors, some areas, more remote work than not, which has was not the case in 2018, 2019. So things have flipped quite a bit. And so when we think about benefits to working remotely, I really like this diagram here, these bubbles. This is from Buffer, and this resource is at the end of the presentation, but Buffer releases what we call the State of Remote Work report every single year. So this is from their State of Remote Work in 2022. And of course, the survey is asking, what benefit do you experience because you work remotely? As you can see, again, flexibility is forefront here. That is really the most important. You see other reasons. I would love for anyone to comment in the chat box, what has been a benefit for you if you have worked remotely or you've experienced, what has been the best benefit for you? Feel free right now to comment in the chat box. Again, I also see a few more folks coming in, so welcome to the session, of course. And this is being recorded, and also the slides will be provided as well afterwards. I think that that bubble, it's better for me financially. That is going to increase again based on those gas prices, also based on inflation, right? So we have staying safe from COVID. Yes, Lee. No time, expense commuting, work-life balance. Absolutely. I do feel the privilege of being safe from COVID. I actually, one reason that I started working remotely even before the pandemic is that I have an elderly mother who is a widow. And so I wanted to be with her and obviously also keep her safe from COVID. And so for me, this is a great arrangement. Keeping healthy. Yep, absolutely. And I do want to share too, as we move forward, that there's both benefits and drawbacks and challenges to remote work. So I'm not here today to completely tout that remote work is right for everybody and that we should all be doing it. And that there are no drawbacks, because we will get to those. And remote work is not right for everyone. And so I do want to help you assess if this is the right type of environment for you. Oh, Kristen, I like it. Kristen said in the chat box, save on buying clothes. Okay, so that brings me to something funny. I don't know, Kristen or anyone else, who has heard of, and you feel free to put your reaction button up if you like, who has heard of the Zoom shirt phenomenon? Has anyone heard of the Zoom shirt? Feel free to, I think there's a reaction button. You can put yes, or you can put your thumbs up. Who's heard of Zoom shirts? Nope. Okay. No, Larry. Okay, so if you have worked remotely, especially and particularly on video, right? So Zoom is one of the primary platforms, of course. The idea is that individuals who work remotely, they may be more relaxed. They may wear pajamas or sweats on the bottom because nobody's going to see them really, from the top down. And so really you want to, this funny phenomenon comes up where people have a professional shirt like hanging on the back of their chair, hanging on their door, and that's their Zoom shirt. So when they have to get in on a meeting or something, they just grab it, they put it on, and then they take it off later. So they got their Zoom shirt. Yeah, so Benjamin said, I've done a number of interviews in a suit coat and pajama pants. Right. So you got your Zoom shirt. Now, is Zoom shirt the best way to go about doing remote work? Maybe not, based on habits, but we're going to talk about that. It is a little bit of a funny fact about remote working. Okay, so here we go. So we are going to actually now assess remote work for you. So what I would like you to do is if you have a paper in front of you or a pencil, something like that, I would encourage you to grab it. If you don't, that's okay. You can kind of just go through this as we talk, but we're going to do just very briefly together a assessment based on, is remote work right for you? Okay, so go ahead. I'm just going to pause. If you need to grab a pencil, a paper, go ahead and do that. All right, so I have 8 statements here. Okay, so if you have a pencil and paper, if you want to just number down the paper 1 through 8, go ahead and do that. So again, if you have a paper in front of you, just number down your paper 1 through 8. So I'm going to read each one of these statements very briefly here. And I want you to assess for yourself. Do you strongly agree with this statement? Agree? Are you neutral? Do you disagree, or do you strongly disagree? So those choices are on the bottom of the screen. So I want you to pick one for each statement that I read and go ahead and write that statement down, or keep track of it in your head if you can. But so go ahead, and we will start with the first one is thinking about yourself. Again, this is for you. I initiate communication regarding tasks and projects and keep my team informed. And not all of these may apply to you, but try to assess if that sounds like you. Okay. Oh, I think we have somebody who is unmuted. We'll go ahead and mute you unless you have a question. Okay. I initiate communication regarding tasks and projects and keep my team informed. All right. The next one, I have strong communication skills, especially written communication. I am self-disciplined, highly motivated, and I'm able to stay focused. I'm able to resolve problems independently. I have a designated workspace, which is separate from my home life. I'm willing to communicate through multiple channels, including being on video as needed. I'm interested in working remotely and have explored working remotely since the start of COVID. And the last one, I'm confident that I can influence my career path as a virtual worker. All right, so I want everyone to kind of look at their answers holistically now. And again, there's no right or wrongs here. This is just based on your own personal assessments. I want you to add up how many you have in the agree range. So that would be agree or strong, agree or strongly agree. Okay. And so if you have about 5 to 6 of them in that range, there's a good chance that remote work is a good fit for you, that's something that would make sense for who you are based on your past experiences. It shows that you have some of those skill sets, that you're independent, self-motivated, you're a strong communicator. So if you have about 5 to 6 of them or more, if you have a little bit of less than that, or you're neutral, there are some things here that of course can be learned. So you might not have a designated workspace right now. That's okay. You might not have explored it, but these are things that you could focus on, that you could work on. All right. So feel free to comment in the chat box if you have any questions about this assessment, or if this assessment, if it does make sense for you, if you feel like that, I do want to move forward with remote work, let us know. This is not a something that's going to say, no, you can't do it, but it's just going to put our mindset in the right place as we move forward. Also pause for just a second and see if there's any questions. So all these things on the screen relate to being a capable and, focused and really strong remote worker. And so we're going to continue talking about those skill sets, right? So part of this workshop is understanding remote skills and language, okay? So I would love for a few folks in the chat box to share with me, based on what we've already talked about, based on what you know, what are some skill sets, if you were to think of skills that are really important for professionals in the remote work world? So put an answer in the chat box. What do you think are some skill sets? We've already talked about some of those. So we have prompt responses. Yes. And that can relate to asynchronous communication. Time management. Yes, and time management being very self-disciplined and directed. Yes, being comfortable with video conferencing, absolutely. If you're not comfortable being on video, it's going to be very difficult for you to work remotely, because even if your job does not center around being on video, there are times where you will have to get on video. So here's, now these skills right here, these are transferable skills. These are soft skills that we see that are important for all jobs. So I'm not here to say that remote work is entirely different than being in person. A lot of what we talk about translates from in-person to remote. So if you've worked primarily in person up until now, don't think that you can't transfer your skills to the remote work world. You can absolutely do that. It's up to you to share that story of how you can translate those skills. There are a couple of great resources on the screen. One is called, and these are hyperlinked, so you can access them later, the Remote Work Competency Model, and also this is the Remote Work Dictionary. I'm not going to go into those too much, but these are resources for you to access later. So I've just switched screens here, and as you can see, this is what we call the Remote Work Competency Model. This is from that resource called Workplace List. And this is looking at competencies at every stage of remote work, from when you start in that environment, in a distributed environment. The word distributed is really focused on remote, and then becoming a remote leader. So again, if we scroll in here, we see those competencies of things that you have to focus on. And they will explain each one of these. So if we look even at digital proficiency and communication, thinking about the language of remote work that we're talking about, channel and mode switching. Mode switching has to do with switching from one environment to the other. You might be on Zoom, then you might be on email, then you might be doing something else. So it's switching between different communication channels. But really having autonomy, time management skills, and being independent are extremely important. You have to take initiative and be self-directed, even more so in the remote work world. The other thing that's on there is a lot of different language out there when it comes to the world of remote work. You may have heard me say the word asynchronous or synchronous. Those are two common terms. If you haven't heard of them, it will be helpful for you to become familiar with terms like, again, asynchronous or synchronous. So this is a dictionary here that you can look at some of these words. You'll see the word async right here. And that is really asynchronous communication is communication and actually let's find, here's the noun, that occurs outside of real time, meaning that people are involved at different times. So asynchronous might be emailing, file sharing, messages. It's communication. You're not communicating live together. Right now, we are not doing asynchronous communication. We are doing synchronous because we are live and I'm talking to you. But check out that remote work dictionary. There's a lot of good trends in here that or trends. There's lots of good terms in here. Let me say that again. Lots of good terms in here that might be helpful to think about, especially when you start talking that language and working with remote companies or really interviewing with remote companies. Okay. So I'm going to switch back to our slide. Now, Claire, I just switched back to the slide. So if you don't see that, let me know, but I'm back on the slides right now.
I can see the slides.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, so transitioning to remote work. So we're going to start moving forward and talking about really assessing, again, your fit for remote work, but also assessing an employer and how they handle remote work, and then talking about remote jobs. Okay, so I think that sometimes there is a little fear and trepidation when it comes to, can I work remotely? I haven't really done this before. Everyone else is doing it. And so first you took that assessment with me. That's kind of a personal assessment, but also ask yourself these questions in the blue on the right-hand side of the screen. Have you worked with or managed teams or individuals in other work sites or offices? That's working remotely. Have you reported to leadership that might have been offsite or not always present? That's working remotely. Have you transitioned to Zoom meetings during COVID, even if you work in person? That's working remotely. So a lot of us have had touch points, not all of us, but a lot of us have had touch points with working remotely. And even if you haven't had these touch points, technically right now you're experiencing the concept of being remote. So the more you attend these types of sessions, the more you engage online, that's going to increase your knowledge and your confidence in being in that remote work world. On the left-hand side of the screen are some more remote terms, things that you might see in that remote work dictionary. These terms were part of a post that a remote career coach had on LinkedIn. Her name was Leslie. And, talking about, if you are seeking a remote job, you have to present yourself as interested, passionate, and knowledgeable about some of these, remote work terms. And again, it's not that you have to work remote, but you want to translate your skills to that. So these types of terms you want to think about including in your applications, on your resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, in your speech, when you're talking and interviewing. You want to get used to talking about your interest in remote work. So if you are writing a cover letter, you want to talk about that interest in remote working, or translating those skills and sharing how that connects to remote work. On your resume, often resumes have a summary section on there. They also have bullet points. You want to use some of this language to showcase that interest in the world of remote work. And before we move on to, when we're talking about yourself, when you think about the world of remote work, there's this concept from an author named Bill Murphy, and it's called the First Things Rule for Working Remotely. So when we think about schedules and remote best practices, I know somebody asked about timing, scheduling for remote work. You really have to be even more intentional with timing. When you're working remotely, you also have to allow buffer time for meetings so that you don't get fatigued. And that is also true for in-person, but it's easy for people to schedule things. And so if you have meetings, you want to make sure that you put 15-minute buffers on the end of those. You also want to make sure that schedule-wise that you take specific time to get outside of your workspace. Remote workers are prone a little bit more to burnout. Very much so, remote workers can work more and burn out more. And so you have to schedule time just to get away from that computer, that office. The first things rule talks about your habits. And so this goes back to that Zoom shirt phenomenon. To work from home successfully, the first thing workers need to do was to get up in the morning, shower, and get dressed as if they were going to the office. So this is the concept. If you are working remotely, you need to stick with your habits and routines that have worked for you and made you feel accomplished and made you feel like you're getting ready for your day, just as you did in person. I try to do this as well. I try to get fully dressed every day, put on, a little bit of makeup, get my breakfast, have a morning routine as if I were walking out the door, because otherwise that changes my mindset of how I'm going about things throughout the day. So keep those habits. Okay. So now we're going to talk just a little bit about, this is really the heart and core of the remote work movement. It's this concept of a remote first culture, right? So a remote first culture is, in my mind, extremely important to find a company, an organization that considers itself remote first, or at least practices the concepts that I'll talk about. On the screen, you see an individual named Laura Fowler. I would definitely follow her. Follow her on social media, follow her on LinkedIn. She is the founder and CEO of Distribute Consulting and also the Remote Work Foundation. And I've had the pleasure of connecting with her, and just a wealth of information that she shares about remote and also truly hybrid environments, because that's where we find ourselves again, is hybrid environments. This concept is what she says: adjust your mindset. When one person is remote, everyone is remote. Build workflows and communication structures to support equal access, regardless of location. So the reason she's sharing this is really focused on equity. If you don't have intentional remote work policies and practices, remote workers will get the short end of the stick. And equity does lean more towards in-person employees. Now, I'm not saying that's the case for every office. I know that remote work is really being highlighted right now, so you may feel like it is different for you. But generally speaking, this is often what happens because of not having that in-person connection. So this is really about information flow. Information flow as far as who has access to the most current information. A lot of people in person, they have that side chat, that chit chat. They talk to each other, they pass each other in the hallway or at the facility, wherever they work. And they have more of a advantage being in person. So we need to focus on the fact that everyone is remote. Some of the best remote companies that have remote first cultures, their leadership and their management, they also work remotely, or they have experienced remote work and been through that so that they can empathize and understand with those that work with them as well. I'm just going to pause just for a second, because I know I've been talking a lot, and see if there's any questions. Keep moving here. So if you're wondering, what are those aspects, those criteria for being remote first? These are them right here. I won't necessarily read through all of these, but as you can see, these are very important. And so I bring this up because if you are searching for a remote job, you want to search for an organization that really addresses these, that is focused on these aspects on the screen. And you want to ask interview questions when you are assessing that company to see if these things are actually true at this organization. And some companies are in process and transition, and that's okay. I think this mindset is even more important than just finding a remote job, because I can share with you a bunch of resources of how to find a remote job boards, etc. And I will share those with you. However, you want to find a culture that is going to prioritize you and invest in you. And so these are the things that we need to think about. Remember, communication is asynchronous first in a remote work culture. So communication doesn't just go around that live communication, having meetings all the time, being in person. It's asynchronous. So they have to have communication channels at a company that are asynchronous first, right? And really think about that accessible documentation culture. A strong remote first company is documenting more, is communicating more. If you feel like your company is over communicating to you and you work remotely, that's probably a good thing, because you need to over communicate in the world of remote work. And so again, here we find ourselves, what is happening, as you can see, I have this arrow, is that with the pandemic, we have a lot of companies started with really emergency remote work. We have, because of COVID, it's an emergency, we need to work remotely. That's not the case, again, for every company. One of my remote work expert friends said, not every job, of course, can be done remotely. We know that. You cannot be a car mechanic and necessarily do that remotely, right? That's a great question. So I got a question from Roman about how might you ask questions that help you determine if they are really remote first for a potential new employer. And that's great, because I'm actually going to give you those questions in just a moment. So we'll get to that. So a lot of companies have started in that emergency remote, but they need to move over to that sustainable or that remote first culture. So there are some companies out there that are actually still existing in emergency remote work, and they're not investing in their people as much. They're not showcasing that equity. So again, that's why, again, we're focused on this, that leadership and management needs to be leading by example. They need to be talking about remote work. They need to be experiencing it themselves. And then, of course, remote work policies. One of the best questions that you can ask an employer, speaking to Roma's question, is, do you have a remote work policy, and can you share it with me? Can you tell me about it? If a company has a good majority of remote workers and there is no remote work policies or expectations, I would see that as a challenge or a potential, red flag, especially for a large company. If it's a very, very small company, there may be, more of that communication that just because of the size, it works out. But in most cases, there should be some sort of expectations or policies there. So again, Roman, to go back to your question, how do you examine a remote company culture? These are questions on the screen that you can think about asking in an interview or even before an interview. As a career coach, one of the best recommendations that I have is to always try to assess a company even before you get to the interview process. Talk with people that work at the company. Find reviews online or glassdoor.com and find these questions here. The highlighting question at the top is, how did your company shift when the pandemic happened? What remote policies exist within your office? How has the company culture changed with your team working remotely? How do you give feedback to your remote employees? That is a big one. Feedback. How do they provide that? And you want to ask how often, actually, I don't even see this question on here, but you really want to think about how often are you communicating with your supervisor and with your team? Okay, because sometimes in the world of remote work, you either have too many meetings or you don't have enough meetings. It's important to have check-in meetings on a weekly basis. So if your supervisor is only going to check in with you once a month and you're working remotely, that's a problem. So you want to make sure that you're checking in, because you're not going to have that side chit chat, that opportunity to talk to your supervisor when you're in the office. And again, all of this information that's on the slides will be shared with you afterwards. Okay. So this is a slide for participation. In the interest of time, you know, I'm going to kind of continue moving forward here, but what are the biggest challenges for professionals working remotely? Again, everything, there's so many benefits. There's so many ways that remote work has transformed and help us to live more flexible and meaningful lives, but there's also challenges. So if you have a challenge, go ahead and, you know, put it in the chat box. But as we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Oh, and the interesting thing is the first person that put something in the chat box, Lee, said isolation. That's it. I mean, that is really hits the head on the nail here. That's something that I personally feel working remotely from time to time is isolation, right? And so if you are working remotely, you have to be more intentional. A lot of individuals think that introverts actually thrive in remote working. They can, but introverts can also even be more isolated because you really have to intentionally reach out to other people. So that's something where you really need to think about how is your remote team providing time for socialization? That's a question to ask as well. How is the remote team providing time for socialization? Okay. And then really not being able to unplug, remote burnout. So really spending too much time on, as is it Sindhu said in the chat box, too much workload, right? That burnout, we could have a whole other session on remote burnout. Time zones, working more. So these are some of the challenges. And these are challenges that you shouldn't have to face alone. These should also be addressed by the whole culture of your workplace. So this slide, I'm going to actually kind of go quickly through this slide. This isn't something that's necessarily about remote work. I want to get to talking more about remote work, but if you are an employer, if you are a leader, a manager, et cetera, these are remote work best practices to think about, things that we've talked about before: structuring meetings, socializing, having in-person connections if you can. So again, this slide will be here, but we're going to keep moving on, but you want to think about those remote work best practices. So finding remote work, you're probably wondering, okay, is she going to get to this part? Yes, she's going to get to this part. This slide, this resource right here, if you are currently working remotely, advocating for remote work flexibility. All right. So if you want to work remote and you're not sure, this is a great article for you that was written by an individual on themuse.com. How do you talk to your boss about that? Right? You have to think about all these things, accomplishments that you have a track record that shows that you can work remotely. Think about starting that conversation months before that might happen. Think about compromising and maybe a trial period. Say, instead of just saying, can I work remotely? Can we try this out and see how it goes? And of course, you want to anticipate possible objections based on your particular situation. Okay. So you may find yourself wanting to not move away from your current job and try to find a whole other job. This is an option that you should think about. It's very possible. Don't let this go by if you think that you can talk to your supervisor and there might be compromise. There's lots of industries that were completely against remote working, and now they are having more flexible work arrangements. Okay, so we got some questions earlier about industries, right? Remote work opportunities. On the left-hand side of the screen, those are industries that we typically see offer more in-person work arrangements, right? So retail, manufacturing, social services, medicine, higher education, K through 12, being in person, being with people. Now, all of these also can offer remote jobs. Every industry can offer remote work. Even in manufacturing, there may be some employees that are working not on the floor of a manufacturing facility, but supporting those workers. However, On the right-hand side of the screen, this is from Flex Jobs. And these are for the year of 2022, truly the top career fields to watch when it comes to remote work. Tech is definitely dominating this, right? So you think about tech companies, project management, HR, sales, but it doesn't matter where you are, your skill sets can be utilized remotely. And I want all of you to be confident in that. So as we move through here, I know we have just a few minutes left, remote job search considerations. A few things to think about in working remotely. Read job descriptions carefully. Some do have location restrictions. You want to talk that out. Try out remote work before you get involved in it. A lot of people think they're going to love it, and then they get into it and they realize it's not the best fit. So freelance, do contract work, volunteer, get on video more, try it out for yourself. And again, remember to include remote skills, language, and technology on your application documents. If you have experience with any remote technology, and that can be anything related to using a computer, make sure you include that on your resume and in your application. Practice interviewing, right? So you want to make sure that you practice being on video. Being on video is very important no matter what you do in remote work. So you want to practice that, find a career coach, and get feedback. Another thing to consider, of course, is when it comes to networking. So I have to put this slide up here because ultimately, networking, building relationships is the #1 way to find a job. That has not changed, even with remote work. The best way for you to network if you are looking for a remote job is one-on-one video conversations. Get on Zoom and start meeting with people one-on-one on your computer on Zoom, having conversations, having what we call informational interviews, which are just conversations with another professional. That is the best way to network. So get on video and also utilize LinkedIn daily. If you're not utilizing LinkedIn as much, start following remote work influencers. Connect with me, see who I follow. So it's really being virtual, making those connections. And again, being on video, that's going to be so important. So you're probably wondering, okay, where are those remote job boards? I have a ton of resources about remote job boards. I do want to highlight Flex Jobs is one of my favorite remote job resources. And it highlights all different types of jobs, just not remote, part-time jobs, contract jobs. There's a ton of part-time jobs that are done remotely. These are all different remote work resources right here. And I really encourage you to think about looking through each one of these. I especially would recommend this Career Sidekick. There are lots of remote job boards out there, but I want you to encourage you to also look at all job boards because a lot of job boards now have a filter for remote work. However, these are great job boards here too. So I know I think we're at the end here. Gina, good question about Flex Jobs. Flex Jobs is actually a subscription-based service. I would never recommend that someone join something they have to pay for as far as finding a job. However, this is an American-based company, very legit, and they have lots of resources. They highly vet their jobs. Flex Jobs, more than any other organization I've met, goes through and vets their jobs to make sure that there's no scams, nothing fishy going on. So I would highly recommend it as a career coach. Okay. I know that our time is pretty much almost done here. I'd love to share information. So thank you for allowing me to overwhelm you with information. I have other remote resources here for you to check out as far as remote tools, skills, interviewing, and even some company resources if you're coming from a company standpoint. And again, I just want to thank you for listening. I will look through some of those questions and make sure I've addressed them. My email here is at the bottom. And of course, shaferleadership.com. That's where I work. But otherwise, though, I'm going to kind of stick around for just a moment. I know that we are at time here, but just to address any other questions, right? I know I want to leave at least a couple minutes for questions if you need to go. Of course, I'll let Claire come on here, but there we go.
So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and add those in the chat, or if you feel comfortable, you can unmute yourself and ask a question that way as well.
Look through, see here, there's questions. The best way to prepare for a remote interview, again, is to get on Zoom and start practicing, right? So. See a question. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa and Roman and Lee. Thank you so much. And again, there's lots of remote job boards on there, so you can check them out, but filter according to your experiences. LinkedIn also has, I would encourage everyone to set up a search for themselves on LinkedIn as well, specific to their skills and experiences.
Eilis, did you say that you were gonna, is the library going to send that slideshow, or is it in the chat, or?
So I can email out the slides to everyone. And this was also recorded, so when the video is available, I can send that out to everyone as well. I'll also send out a survey for everyone. If you could just take a few minutes to fill that out, that really helps us with planning for future programs. So watch for an email from the library with all that information.
Good question, Lisa. Absolutely. And there's going to be a lot of hyperlinks. Again, I know folks are looking for job boards, so you should be able to click directly on the PDF, directly on those hyperlinks to see where to go. And ultimately, I think the last thing I'll say is that I recommend is there's a lot of job boards out there, but your best resource for finding remote jobs is connecting with other remote professionals through LinkedIn, through warm contacts. So really focus on that relationship building.
Well, thank you so much.
I have a quick question, Eilis. You talked about async communication.
Yes.
I actually run an office of remote workers, and my industry is very much not possible to do async communication because each person's job is kind of relying on what the other person is doing.
Sure.
Is there any kind of tips to how to kind of maybe work around that, or create that same kind of feel, or create that kind of understanding of where everybody's time is, and that communication unfortunately has to be kind of in a more time efficient way?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Eric. I think that there's multiple things. Like, I feel like we could probably have like a 10-minute conversation about that, but I would say that I would definitely look into Workplace List too as a resource. They talk a lot about asynchronous communication. And I think it's about really establishing those expectations, right? Because, it's hard to figure out exactly what's going on without assessing your current workplace, but making sure that everyone's in on the same page. And there may be a remote work tool, and I know there's a link to the tools that I provided, a remote work tool that may assist with that a little bit. Again, it's going to depend on, security in your organization, technology, but there maybe be a tool that could help with that type of communication, or help with that process of moving one thing to the next. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Eric.
Just wait another minute to see if anyone has any last minute questions.
So I could probably email you on this, but I am, I've been a stay-at-home mom for a long time, and I'm coming back into work at an interesting time, right? So I am trying to establish a LinkedIn account, and I have had one, but it's very minimal. So do you have any tips on that, or just, everyone just goes online into LinkedIn and they sort of guide you through how to boost your profile, or any suggestions you have there?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you're thinking about LinkedIn, because it's definitely a place that you want to be. If somebody Googles you, it'll show right up. So, I would say there's a lot of resources, obviously, even if you just Google about how to build a LinkedIn. Honestly, one of the best ways is LinkedIn has LinkedIn Learning. And some of those LinkedIn learning resources are part of their premium. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you get premium right away, but if you're just starting out, you can get it 1 free month of LinkedIn premium. And so you can take classes, like really quick, I mean, simple classes of how to build a LinkedIn profile directly through LinkedIn. Otherwise, of course, if you have access to a career coach or find a career coach in the community, that one-on-one help of reviewing your profile is very helpful, but it's really learning a little bit and honestly just getting involved, looking at other people's profiles and seeing what people are doing on LinkedIn.
Well, and Glenview Public Library offers access to LinkedIn Learning with your library card.
Okay.
So I think a lot of other area libraries do as well. So you'll want to check with your home library to see if they offer that access.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
Awesome. I know Brian put that in the chat box. Awesome.
Well, thanks so much, Eilis. This was a really great presentation. I think we all learned a lot about remote working.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Claire. Thanks for having me.
I'll go ahead and stop the recording.